Hi, I'm Loyiso Madinga.
And I'm Gail Gaillie.
And this is a special bonus series of An Idiot's Guide to Saving the World, the podcast for anyone who cares about building a better world but doesn't know where to start.
We are on a mission to get everybody on board to achieve the global goals. There are 17 goals that the world has promised to deliver by 2030. And we spent our last two series exploring what they are and then what needs to change. Now that we're officially halfway to the 2030 deadline, we are not halfway to achieving them. So it's time for some bright ideas about the future.
So recently we held an event in New York City where we invited some incredible politicians, filmmakers, business leaders and activists to share some thoughts about how we can steal the win in the second half.
And over these 3 special episodes, we've invited some of those guests back to get everybody as inspired as we were. So kind of think of this as our very own Super Bowl halftime show.
I like that. I think we're going to TM that one.
Are you kidding? I love that. That basically means I'm Beyonce. Well, we are taking our halftime metaphor extremely literally, and we're going to delve into the world of sport to see how it can be a force for change. We're meeting the filmmaker and activist Kely Nascimento, who, as the daughter of one of the most famous footballers in the world, has used her platform to advocate for issues such as gender equality, racial justice, and social inclusion.
If you want to know what's happening in any society, just go look at the football. Race, gender, everything.
And later on, we'll be speaking to the Olympic sailor Hannah Mills, who is not just a champion of her sport, but of sustainability and environmental conservation too.
The power of sport is just phenomenal. It's like nothing else.
Hi, Loyiso.
Hi, Gail. How you been?
I'm all right, thanks. I'm excited to be doing this one today because I've got some sporting news from my side.
Oh, do tell.
Well, I just got back from a weekend with the Formula One Mercedes team, talking about not cars going round and round in circles, about which I know very little, but about what they're doing for sustainability. And I thought it was fascinating. I've never been into F1. I've literally run a mile when I hear the noise on the telly, but there's actually a ton going on behind it. It just made me really start thinking, sport's more than it meets the eye. What is it about sport, do you think, that is so potent? Because the thing that makes me giggle is every level it inspires insane passion, or even, you have to short circuit because it's too much.
Well, I think that is its powers. It's this very visual way that we see ourselves in our sporting teams, which I think is like the real power of sport, and that's why we enjoy it. But that's why it can also uplift people, because you really do see yourself in it. I mean, like, have you seen people how happy they truly are after their team wins? I mean, like, there's stories in South Africa where they are literal. It sounds a little sad now that I'm thinking about it, but like families won't eat that night because a football team lost. It's like, no, we cannot eat at a time like this. Look at father. Father is sad. We cannot eat father's sadness.
What's the big in Johannesburg where you grew up? What's the big sport? Is it soccer? Like, what is it?
Yeah. It's definitely football and rugby. Those are our national sports. Yeah. Those are the ones. Those are the ones that we carry the most emotion for. And you see it, man. Like in South Africa, when we had obviously before, black people weren't allowed to play certain sports nationally, and then we got all the sanctions and stuff. And so when we came back and there was an integration into sports that weren't before seen as black people sports, now that there was like, as much as people protested, they introduced quotas into sports, but then kids seeing themselves in a sportsman. Like now we got like cricket is a normal sport for everyone to play. Rugby is a normal sport for everybody to play because there was that representation, and it's the power of being able to see yourself. It's that vicarious living, though sad when you're 40, looking back, is really great when you're 4, looking forward to like have the life you want to live. And so that's like a real power sports can have.
Oh, that's really true. And the episode that we're doing today starts with someone who's using sport for gender equality ambition, global goal number 5, which isn't traditionally associated with the big sports like football, like rugby. But I think it's really changing, and it needs to, right? Because the progress on goal 5 is so shocking. I mean, it would never win a match on its own. And it currently is not going to be achieved, if we go at the speed we're going at now, for 286 more years.
What?
Right, we're meant to get there by 2030. But we're not going to get there till 2309.
Until the year we cannot pronounced properly quite yet. That's not
Exactly.
the sexy way of saying that.
2309,
What year is
2309,
this?
what do you
It's
say?
year 2309. Sounds like a number you dial in text 5 to 2309. But
that's such a good campaign. We should do that.
Oh, that's actually not bad at all. But that's a horrible state of affairs. But it's exciting to have sports as a way to, improve the goals. It's like any way that's exciting and sexy, which we know sports is. It's got that excitement, it's got that sex appeal that's sometimes lacking in the goals. So if we can plug that in, that for me is just another exciting way we can reach that 2030 goal and not that 2309 goal.
Her first guest is Kely Nascimento. So she is a public speaker, a social activist, a documentary filmmaker, and she's working right at the intersection of sport and social justice, especially about gender equality, racism and inclusion. And she draws on a very unique perspective because she is the daughter of a footballing legend.
Kelly is also the president of the Nascimento Foundation, which supports programs to achieve a global understanding of peace through sports, storytelling, and the arts. So who better to kick off this episode all about how sports can be a force for change?
So my name is Kely Nascimento. I work in sports for development and diplomacy. So any way in which sports can impact the world in a positive way, or it can be used as a tool or as a language to change the world. I am a director and content producer. I'm not going to leave out the elephant in the room. My father is Pelé, the Brazilian football player. I'm very proud of that. Everything that I do has to do with him. I think one of the first memories and consistent memories that I had with him and consistent feelings that I had when I was with him in public was that I was always amazed how he could walk into a room and just make people happy. I just always thought, my God, if you could, can you imagine if you could bottle that, right? To just for 10 minutes make people's day in a world where there's so much difficulty, so much, pain. But yeah, I think that was part of probably my formative sort of experience with him that made me do what I do today.
How do you then grow up in that world, and what influences you to create stories? Because I think they're important right now as we're in the second half of the global goals, because it's not just about the numbers at this point, it's also about the kind of stories we're telling ourselves. It's easy to tell ourselves a bad story about the goals just because we're not halfway with the numbers. But I think there's also opportunity to tell other stories to keep us going forward and to keep us focused on actually making this 2030 goal. So I'm really interested to know, what is your entry into the world of storytelling and what is your approach to it?
When we moved to the United States, my parents put me into the United Nations School because at the time it was almost like a public, international school, because it wasn't very popular to be international in the 70s. But it was amazing because I didn't feel like other until I left, even in not speaking English, But it also does a little brainwashing. So it makes you sort of romanticize and revere anything that has to do with like making the world a better place, especially when it surrounds the UN. And so when I went into the arts, I went into branding and photography and graphic design. A lot of my efforts were spent doing the same kind of thing that I do now with sport. But at the time I would do it elevating people through photography or through storytelling that were doing what you guys are doing, what the people we work with today are doing. And then about 13 years ago, believe it or not, through a friend of mine, my brother-in-law actually, who'd met a young Brazilian girl in the favelas. He actually is a Brazilian who trains American youth. And every year he would take them to Brazil in the summer with their parents for like a cultural trip. And he would always schedule some game time or some tours of professional teams and some pickup games on the beach they would join. And then he would always take them to a favela to see one of their teams, because favelas have their own infrastructure, their own tournaments. And this year, it was way before the 2014 World Cup, he met this young girl who was playing there. As soon as he got back, he called me and he said, you had to see her. She was better than all of the boys she was playing with. She was the only girl there. She was better than all of our boys. She had no shoes on. So our boys sort of figured out who had her size and left their shoes. We have to get her out of there because she'll never make anything out of herself. And, she deserves to have a chance. I guess part of my ignorant brain always thought that if you were that good at something that is that important to us as a nation, that you'd find a way. So I started researching women's football, and I was shocked at what I learned that I didn't know, right? I didn't know that my father won 3 World Cups and it was still illegal for women to play football in Brazil until 1979.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God.
It was a law
Wow.
that you couldn't even put a team together. And I started researching more and more about what was going on. And I found, I was just shocked. And I thought, nobody knows this. I'm like, this is a story. Someone should tell this story. And I was like, wait, I should tell this story. And that's when I became involved with all the sports for development organizations and all of everything that I do now that is really focused through sport, I started doing with this story. Everything that I talked about in terms of gender equity and race and even poverty, all was mirrored in football. The brilliance of football is that it's not just a tool, it's a metric. Because if you want to know what's happening in any society, just go look at the football. Race, gender, everything, right? Like, and it's really true on a micro level in individual teams and also on a macro level with, federations. And to me, that's incredible, right? It should be used, should be studied. It should be used. It's really amazing.
You're so right, because as you say, it's such a universal language, football, isn't it? And it crosses barriers, it crosses traditions, it crosses cultures. And so if you can peg it to an issue like gender equality, goal number 5, which is, not an immediate cross-cultural winner. You've got a lot of countries, you've got religion going against it, you've got history going against it, bias, you name it. For gender equality, is there anything that we haven't tried yet that we could try or that we need to ramp up, or some examples that we need to elevate more? What have you seen in terms of progress that has made a difference that we might pull forward and amplify in the second half of the goals to see if we can get any closer to gender equality all over?
From what I see, I feel like there has to be more top-down, bottom-up involvement, right? Okay, I'll give you a small example. I was sitting at a round table with Generation Amazing, who's the organization out of Qatar that is the legacy component of the bid. They have done a couple of really wonderful roundtables with a lot of people who work in equity through sport. And we had someone at the round table, we were talking about the exact thing, and they were talking about trying to involve more players in activism, right? And, my contribution to that, or my objection to that, was that there's so much asked of players already. So I feel like we do put all this pressure on the athletes so that we don't have to deal with putting pressure on the federations. So we don't have to deal with putting pressure to alleviate pressure on FIFA. FIFA, by the way, has no mechanism of accountability. So I do feel like there needs to be buy-in from the bigger entities. That's, to me, it's not the answer. But I think it's something that we need to start demanding, is buy-in from the bigger entities. Like, for example, if FIFA just literally said, from now on, we just need to know where the money's going. At the end of the year, you show us what you've done with the money that we give you for the women's team.
That's such a great way to change the narrative. It's like, is it all up there at the top, the governments, the corporations, or is it us at the bottom? And that's been thrown at us a lot, especially with the SDGs. It's like, what are you doing, little man? You, the real change. Why aren't you recycling and stop gender violence and whatever? But it's such a great, empowering narrative to change, to say, you little person, 5'5", your power is actually talking truth to the power, putting pressure on the power. I think that we can get more done too in some places, where we can just approach our governments, our corporations and organizations with a little bit more like, we won't take this anymore. This is what we expect now.
It's also a very exciting time, I think, because of, millennials and Gen Z and how vocal they are and how fearlessly they make decisions with their moral compass and hold brands and organizations accountable, right? It's true. But it's true. Like, I think that they have a bullshit detector that's so much better than mine was. They have so much more information, and this information, it is damaging sometimes, but it also makes them incredible little soldiers, right? It makes them incredible advocates for change. And there's definitely pressure. And I think that everyone is seeing the pressure because sports is a consumer, right? It's entertainment.
The 2034 World Cup has been awarded to Saudi Arabia. That's interesting from a woman's point of view, isn't it? What do you think about that, Kely Nascimento?
I think it's not a good thing for women that we're having a World Cup in Saudi Arabia without any sort of pressure on them, right? Like, I think everyone should be able to have a World Cup. And I like the idea of World Cups in the Middle East. Because I do feel like I was in Qatar, and I have to tell you, aside from everything else, there was every African nation represented that was there was playing on the home turf. And it was pretty freaking amazing. The energy was amazing. I mean, the Senegalese fans that were in Qatar were just like, I mean, the joy, right? And the Tunisia game and the Morocco game, and there was a reason for that. They were not others for the first time ever. They were not in a European nation or playing in a World Cup. So I feel like that's important. It's accountability, right? I mean, it would be nice if it was, listen, you can have this provided you make some change in a few of these things, right? Or provided you abide by the human rights clauses that FIFA have now put into the bid, which now no longer matter because they're giving away the bid without letting anybody bid on it, right? So, yeah.
I also think, we've got 10 years, haven't we? We've got 10 years until that World Cup takes place. If you think how different the discourse was, the platform is available to have that discourse. Like you're saying, Kelly, the young people now are so much more fired up and demanding than they were 10 years ago. God knows what they're going to be like in 10 years' time. They've got 10 years to really grapple with this. And hopefully someone like FIFA will maybe become a little more responsive and accountable than perhaps they have been to date.
I was on a panel with a really wonderful journalist who said that one of the issues is that people are getting their news from TikTok, and I said, well, honestly, I have children that if they felt more comfortable getting believing their news from mainstream media than they did from TikTok, I would feel like I failed. I'm like, I want you to be as scrutinizing of TikTok as you are of mainstream media. There's a reason why we started getting our news in the past 10 years from comedy shows. There's a vacuum of accountability, right? And of adherence to truth without the influence of corporations that allows that to happen. So that's another thing that I hope that we are able to see clearly. I've been invited several times in the last year to come host women-led sporting events in Saudi Arabia. And I haven't not gone for any particular reason but timing. And, where are we going to get that information though, right? Because aside from the fact that there's a lot wrong in Saudi Arabia, we're also not really encouraged to find out good things about Saudi Arabia, right? Or about the Middle East.
Agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I also hope that the same kind of scrutiny is placed on us in the West, because I think, in 10 years, Saudi Arabia may have more rights for women than we do in the United States. It's a long time, I'm telling you. I'm not, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I also wonder whether the women's football movement or soccer movement, again, 10 years is a long time. From the UK perspective, that has changed so dramatically in the last couple of years. The profile and the respect for the women's team has rocketed. And I think in Spain, the same. So it may be that by the time you get to 2034, it's just ridiculous to not have fantastic women's benefits from the World Cup as much as the men are receiving, right? Because it might just become an equal sport.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope at least for FIFA or the more visible, because I think on the ground it will still take a while, because even though we've had all this movement in many of the federations, on the ground women still don't make money and women still have a hard. I mean, I have a friend whose daughter lives like a mile away from the Chelsea stadium and she can't find anywhere to play an all-girls club to really, really, really where it's competitive football. So she's in a boys' club. But that's their fight. So I think that it is bottom up. And I mean, I see it moving, so it's a good thing. But yeah, I mean, I hope so.
I don't know if it's a blueprint, but we were lucky in South Africa. We love our women's team. It wasn't always easy for them, but we absolutely love them because our men's team is horrible.
Yes.
And our women's team just keeps doing the thing that we need them to do, which is win games and make us look good. And we just love them for it because the men are shoddy. But in the second half, I would love to know what keeps you going. I mean, when you look at 2030, which is far and close, what keeps you positive?
I do think that the next two generations keep me really positive. Look at what's happening right now in the Middle East. I've never in my lifetime heard so many people speaking out. Have you ever seen this many protests for Palestine? They refuse to watch. And I was talking to my mom because my mom was a person who was always, even back in the day in the 70s, sitting there, she would watch the news and she would always, she would deconstruct for us the language. You know how we do now where Israelis are murdered, Palestinians die, or 18-year-old black boys are men and 18-year-old white boys are children, in the US news. She would always deconstruct that kind of stuff for us, even in the 70s. And so I've been doing it for my kids since they were little, with everything. And I feel like today it's become, we've gotten to a point where it's become much more, you don't feel like it's all done in the shadow as much because they won't allow it. That gives me a lot of hope for gender, for race, for everything. I think it needs to be an all hands on deck for the second half. Gloves are off.
Gloves are off. Ended on like the perfect sports analogy right there. I don't think I could have even come up with that.
I know.
But it's really great to hear people who are in the mix, in the trenches, be positive. Because it's very easy to be on the sidelines and just be like bombarded by the negativity. But you listen to somebody like her and you go, oh, okay, cool. I mean, like, it's your attitude is not enough to stop you.
Yeah, totally. At the start of that interview, she talks about how her father could walk into a room and everybody wanted to be with him or talk to him because he was so positive. And she doesn't seem to realize she's got the same gift.
Yes.
Do you remember her when we met her in New York and the interview again? She can say anything in a way that makes you go, yes, please, I'm coming. She talks tough, but she's so positive and driving.
Yeah.
I think she's amazing. Also about her thing about look at football and it'll tell you everything you need to know in society. Like, where's their gender attitude at? Where's their racism? Where's the mood? She's a real kind of advocate for like what sport can do and what it can tell you as well.
Because I guess it can be very easy to throw sports aside and say, at a time like this, we don't have time to be playing, and it's another way. It's another way to go. No, it's as long as we're doing something in a positive direction, it matters, and so is sport. So are the arts, and it's always great to have people reiterate that and show us perspectives like, you want to see how our country is doing? Look at how its sports is doing. Especially look at how its women's sports are doing.
Totally. Now, for our next guest, we are heading off the pitch and into the ocean to speak to Hannah Mills.
Yes, Hannah Mills is the most successful female sailor in Olympic history, with 2 gold medals and 1 silver under her life jacket. And as someone who is used to getting up close and personal with the water, she has a lot of first-hand experience of the issues we are facing with our oceans. Hannah is now an International Olympic Committee Sustainability Ambassador and has launched the Big Plastic Pledge, which calls on elite athletes to push for change in the way plastic is used in sport.
So let's hear a bit more from Hannah about how sports activism might be able to help us out in the second half.
My name's Hannah Mills. I'm a British Olympic sailor. Since retiring, I guess, from Olympic sport, I've joined the Great Britain Sail GP team as part of the Sail GP Global Circuit, and I'm campaigning for the first ever Women's America's Cup. But I'm also a passionate environmentalist and have done lots of projects around sport and using the athlete voice to try and raise awareness around different challenges, whether it's plastic pollution or climate change.
Hannah, welcome to our podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
I mean, I sort of can't even start. I feel so underachieving. What took you from being just a super successful athlete to actually being an environmental campaigner?
When I was younger, I was just so dedicated and focused to one thing, and that was getting to the Olympics and trying to win a gold medal. But as I got older and I started to kind of raise my head above just the sport I was doing a little bit and kind of look elsewhere, I definitely had a sense of just not feeling completely fulfilled and felt like there was something missing. And while that was kind of going on and I was exploring my values and what was important to me, I started to spend more and more time in Rio de Janeiro, where the Olympic Games were taking place in 2016, and just started to notice how bad the plastic pollution was there. It was just so visible, more visible than anywhere I'd ever been before. And this is such a huge problem. And as athletes, actually, we have a platform to be able to speak about it when we do media interviews. And so how could I use that platform? So when I decided to carry on for Tokyo, it was always a huge ambition to realise that platform and to try and use it as best I could to be an advocate for plastic pollution and how we can try and tackle it, as well as trying to win a gold medal.
It's so strange how global warming and the environmental issues that we have, sometimes we don't know how they are affecting us until they directly affect us. Or you as a sportswoman in the water, you obviously, when you see it in the water, it's like more direct. And I was having this conversation this morning with a friend about the waters in my home country of South Africa, in Durban. They have a huge E. coli breakout in one of the cities that's known for its, its beaches and the lovely December holidays. So how do you then use sport to draw more attention, or even just like how much more of a role could sports play in the climate conversation?
I mean, I just feel like the power of sport is just phenomenal. It's like nothing else there is. We all inspired. We all look up to sports people. I know I did when I was growing up, and they're such role models. But also, sporting events have such a big footprint, not only environmentally but also in terms of their reach. I think over half the world's population watched some part of the Olympic Games, and 3 or 4 billion people watched some part of the World Cup. Like, that reach is like nothing else. And if we could actually harness that properly in terms of the environmental and climate conversation, and engage the stakeholders that we have in sport. We have some of the biggest brands and businesses involved in sponsoring sport. And if we can figure out how we properly utilize that and those partnerships to accelerate the changes we need to see and the technologies and all of those things, then I think that would be a massive step in terms of some of the challenges we're trying to solve.
What I'm interested to hear from you is a bit more about your SailGP involvement. So I think for our listeners, tell them a bit more what SailGP is, but also what it is they are doing in this space and how you interact with all that.
So SailGP is quite a new sailing circuit. It's a global sailing circuit, and we're in season 4 now. But it was founded with purpose and impact at its heart. And so from the very outset, sustainability and environmental issues and social sustainability have all been kind of embedded in the core values of what we're trying to do. And in season 2, they launched a really exciting initiative, which is called the Impact League. And this basically pits the teams who are racing on the water in this global sailing circuit against each other in sustainability. And so not only are you racing on the water, you're also racing for the planet. And I think what this did for the league was educate massively all of the athletes involved in the league in sustainability, climate change, help them find the things that they're really, really passionate about. And so it really accelerated the journey, I guess, of the whole league towards some of their goals that they're trying to reach.
It's interesting to listen to you talk about like how the different teams are up for the challenge. Do you find that your guys' athletic sense of competition helps drive people to be like, oh, this is another thing I could kind of focus my sense of like, gotta do it, gotta achieve it. Does it help with the teams?
Oh man, yeah, it's honestly unbelievably competitive. I tell you, you get a bunch of competitive people and put a prize at the end, and that is how you motivate people. So yeah, we could probably learn something from that as well in the wider issue.
I like that thought there, because we're talking about the second half of the global goals, how are we going to achieve them and what can we take from sport, and that how do we make the goals a competition, like between countries, between the goals? Because I think it's not just sports people, it's kind of human nature, isn't it? That if you compete, you want to win. What do you think sport can lend the Global Goals campaign so that we're winning in the second half?
When you're competing, time is constantly the enemy, because you're constantly running out of time to when your peak event is. They say the Olympics moves for no one. I mean, obviously, COVID changed that theory, but ultimately you have a date that you're working towards. And if you're not ready, the moment's gone and you might not get another shot. And it's actually kind of the same with climate change. No one quite knows where that finish line is, but we've got to assume it's closer than perhaps some people might hope it is. And so I think that sense of urgency and that sense of we cannot waste a second, which is what you have in sport every single day. That's what you're living and breathing. And, you're ultimately striving for perfection day in, day out. So those types of narratives, I think, really help.
I'd be very interested to know, coming off of a conversation Gail and I had in the beginning of this episode, where she mentioned the Formula One and how it's somehow has a sustainability program, which I immediately was like, you can't have those two things in the same sentence without a punchline. That it's impossible that these two things exist. But like talking to you, I see the potential with, sport and the goals. Did you have any inkling of like, before you joined, of like, oh man, there's an opportunity for us to be more involved as sports people? Or is that really expanded since you've begun?
Sport has a huge footprint. There's no getting away from it. I think the size of sports footprint is somewhere in the region of the same size as a country like Spain. So it's not insignificant. So first of all, I think sports need to really look at their own footprint and figure out how they can massively reduce it, because there's so much sport can do to reduce it, whether it's looking at the competition calendar and how you travel around countries or around the globe. How can you do it more effectively? Because I would guess that most sports, their biggest footprint is travel. Certainly for SailGP it is. I'm pretty sure for Formula One it would be. But then equally, sports like Formula One and sports like the America's Cup, for example, where design is such a huge element to that sport. And actually the design and engineering that's gone into those sports has a massive impact on the rest of the industry. So, Formula One, a lot of the technology and design that's been used to get to Formula One to where it is now will transcend into the rest of the automobile industry and will have a huge impact on the carbon emissions of cars today. And the same with the America's Cup, the design and technology that's gone into designing those boats and the foils that lift the boats out of the water that massively reduces drag, so they go 3 or 4 times the speed of the wind. That technology is being shifted into the shipping industry, for example, and in many other different industries to reduce the carbon footprint of those. So yeah, it's an interesting discussion. You look at Formula One and, as you said, you might go, well, there's no way it could be sustainable. But it has a part to play. It has a role to play beyond just the sports people being advocates.
There are things you're doing that you're not solving the entire issue because no one can do that. But there are some really cool things that you guys are doing as a team, aren't you? Do you want to talk about some of those?
Yeah, there are. So, I guess a project that our team has been really passionate about is trying to take all of the team bases off grid. So, we're a global circuit. We're traveling around the world. We're pop-up events, essentially. And, at each location, we're obviously plugging into the grid and drawing on the resources from that location. And so we felt like actually we have this tent structure with a lot of surface area on the roof, and a lot of the events we go to are generally quite sunny places. And one of our partners is Low Carbon, who are a renewable energy solutions company. And we thought, actually, can we build something with them that we can use on our base that could take firstly us off grid, but then also how many other teams can we take off grid? So we've got a solar panel array with a wind turbine that we've done a test solution, I guess, on our team tent, and realised that we can take up to 3 teams off grid at any one location. And the whole plan with this was then to create a blueprint so that it could go to other sports teams and we could share it across the entirety of sport. And so other teams can start looking at ways they can come up with configurations or use our configuration to take their own operations off grid. So that's been a really exciting project.
And I think, if I'm not wrong, Hannah, isn't it because of SailGP's engagement with Rockwool that Rockwool have got into helping the ocean at all? So that thing about sport being influential, it is to the public, but it's also really influential to the private sector, isn't it? Because if you think about, you mentioned them, Olympic sponsors, businesses want to be down with the sports people and the sports teams. And so the sports teams can leverage the other direction and go, well, if you want to be in our team, you've got to do something good for the world. I mean, that seemed to be how it really works with your team sponsors. Do you think, Hannah?
100%. And I think all sport needs to kind of really activate around this and go, what are the partners that we want to have on board? And, whoever we've got currently, how can we work with them? How can we capitalize on the things that they're doing and the things that we're doing to really just push everyone to think differently? And that is SailGP's mantra, is think differently. Like, how can we do things differently? When you're signing a partnership deal with a new partner or renegotiating with an old partner, it's how much can you push the sustainability issue, and how much can you get from them? It can't just be about taking a lump sum of money and cracking on, it has to be embedded. And that's what I think all of sport needs to do is to take these partnerships really seriously and push forward in that way. That's
fascinating. I'd love to know if there's when you're in the situation when you're sailing and it's competitive and maybe you're on the back foot, as we go in the second half, like, what's running through your head? What kind of do you have a mantra? Is there a certain mentality that you found that you can tap into for that needed second leg of a race?
Yeah, I mean, you're constantly, as an athlete, you're constantly digging deep, whether it's physically or mentally, you're up against it. And so, you're having to find the reserves that not everyone can always find. And that is part of it. But, in sailing, you're constantly looking for that next opportunity. It's like, okay, I made a mistake here. I've learned from that. But what's next? And you kind of have to push that thing under the rug, and you have to move forward and constantly try and make the next best decision with whatever information's presented in front of you. One of my biggest sort of high performance lessons is always the review. You have to review. And it's the first thing that gets pushed when you feel like time's the enemy. But actually, if you carve out the time for it, it actually makes everything else a whole lot easier because the path forward is a lot clearer.
And what keeps you going? I mean, like we're talking about how immense, if you just go oceans or if you just go gender equality, like what keeps you keeps you positive and hopeful?
I think what gives me hope is just the amount of new ideas and innovations and technologies that are coming out every single day from all around the globe in solving some of the biggest and smallest of the challenges that we're facing, and hearing those stories is just incredibly inspiring. But as Sir David Attenborough said, it's now a communications challenge, is how do we get these new ideas, these solutions spread across the globe and mobilized on a mass scale? That's the challenge we're now facing, because we have a lot of the solutions, but we need to activate.
I just think she is fantastic.
I'm just genuinely just surprised by how much learning we can take from sports and the goals. Between Hannah and Kelly, you can see the potential and the alignment in both of it, and it's huge. She spoke about how communications is one of the biggest challenges going forward now, especially in the second half, to bring more people on board. And what better platform than sports? Just on that level, that's just one level, just getting the messages out and getting people on board. And then you go, oh yeah, because people in sports, and then you can talk about leveraging partnerships. Then those things have more meaning. It's me as a football player or as a team can require more from sponsors, more from leagues to actually align with what we want in our ideas of the global goals or our alignment or our personal goals as a team. And I think it's the kind of innovation that's beyond the tech. It's a kind of innovation that's more on perspective and how we actually operate and move forward in the goals. It's very exciting. It's it gets your brain working in a more broader way. Because I went into this episode, no lies, being like, sports, huh? Okay.
Did you? You were not expecting much?
No, I honestly wasn't. And I honestly got more out of this than potentially any other episode, because it's just absolutely new to me. It's new ways of thinking.
I think you're right there. What makes me excited from a campaign perspective is in the first half, in our first sort of 7.5 years promoting the goals, we haven't really done much with sport. We did it right at the beginning. We did a little activation around football, but it was relatively small, and we haven't done anything major since. So I think if this is a tactic we can weave into the second half, it's going to be pretty impactful.
No, the potential is flipping huge. And so let's wrap it up before we forget everything. Let's do a quick wrap up.
So we're going to wrap up from the world of sport. What is it we're going to take into the second half with us? So are you ready, Loyiso, for an idiot's guide to saving the world with sport in 30 seconds?
Let's go.
3, 2, 1, start.
Activism comes in all shapes and sizes, including athletes.
Yeah, and bring the tools you got, right? It's like Kelly with her filmmaking.
Exactly. And if you think a story needs telling, make sure it's told, maybe by you.
Indeed. Now, sport can be a testbed for solutions.
Yep, surprisingly. And in sport, you cannot waste a second. So let's get on it. We only have a second half to go.
We need more top-down involvement, so it's up to the big organisations just as much as the athletes to advocate for the causes that will make a difference.
Oh, I think we've learned that and so much more in this episode. It's been a mind expander.
It has. So head over to globalgoals.org if you want to learn more, and you'll find a whole load more ways to get involved for yourself.
And if you haven't already heard them, we have 2 whole series full of incredible people who are doing amazing things to help us reach those goals. So scroll back through the feed to go and get inspired. And that's it from me, Loyiso Madinga.
And I'm Gail Gaillie. See you next time.
An Idiot's Guide to Saving the World is an audio production made in collaboration with Project Everyone.
The producer and sound designer is Holly Fisher. Project Everyone's producers are Imogen Fairburn and Tash Ramsaha. The executive producers are Yelaine Goffin, Harry Watson and Ellie DiMartino.
If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, share on your socials and leave a review. It helps other people find us, and the more people find us, the more people are saving the world.